There are very few films where every frame feels like a painting. Barry Lyndon, Lawrence of Arabia, In the Mood for Love, they all come up in conversation when talking about the most visually striking films of all time, and as cinematography has generally been getting better across the board, it's hard for a new film to break into that category. However, a few years ago, one did. At least, in my opinion, it did. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking at how cinematographer Claire Mathon created the world of Portrait of a Lady on Fire through her use of lighting, bold compositions, colour, the inspiration behind the look, as well as the equipment she used to capture everything.
Portrait de la jeune fille en feu.
Now, this is potentially going to surprise a lot of you, as in general, films of this premise, set in this time and of this budget level, tend to be photographed on film. However, this was shot on digital, but not on an Alexa like you'd expect, not a DXL2, a Venice. In fact, Mathon went with the Red's Monstro, and she had a very good reason for it. With Celine, we chose to shoot digitally for the actual resonance it gave to the film, combining memories and period films. We were talking about reinventing and enhancing our 18th century image to current realities. So what's so great about the Monstro? Well, with an enormous sensor, the ability to shoot in 8K, even though Mathon opted for 7, incredible colour science and 17 stops of dynamic range, it's kind of a no-brainer if you're after an ultra high quality image, or to put it in Mathon's words, contemporary echo. As for the glass, Mathon went with Leitz's Thalia lenses, which offer an almost dreamlike feel. With their smooth characteristics, unique bokeh, consistent look throughout the range, they are the optimal choice for a period drama. They give you all the positives of vintage lenses without any of the negatives. By the looks of it, Mathon and Siema really had a look in mind from the beginning, and the unique decision to shoot on digital, and 7K digital at that, was a bold one, but one that worked incredibly well, and one that I won't be surprised if we see more of going forward. Where do you begin with the lighting? Well, to me, it feels almost ethereal. There's this strong sense of melancholy in the beginning that seems amplified by the use of a soft organic light, and I feel as though up until Eloise leaves the house for the first time, it doesn't leave us. Now, in the beginning, this isn't overshadowed by the natural aura that this film embraces, and that does follow us for the rest of the film. So whilst the film feels full of natural light, and it is in some parts, Mathon actually had an incredible amount of control. I mean, just by looking through a couple of behind the scenes photos, I can count at least 10 pieces of diffusion and blocking. I thought that it was as if we never felt the light. I tried to de-emphasize the light's directionality by working on an all-encompassing softness and to capture the variations, the slightest trembling to reveal their redness, to feel their emotion without ever letting the light take over. Now, that leads me to the fact that a lot of the light is motivated, meaning that it would have taken inspiration from the natural light in the room, but then Mathon would enhance it and shape it in order to create that magic. But that isn't where the naturalism ends, as when we move to nighttime, it almost feels more realistic. There's a nice contrast of the moonlight shining into the room, and that juxtaposes really nicely with the warm fire or candlelight. The nights were all about putting light in the room and inventing candlelight, without any candles being in the frame. It's the big decision when doing a period film. What are you doing with the candles? Is there somebody holding them? If we look towards Spencer for a moment, a film she also shot, we can see a similar lighting style, albeit a bit more restrained. Here we don't see the overexposing, there's a lot less blooming, the practicals aren't as prevalent, yet it still feels extremely organic. And that's the same word I use to describe the cinematography of Spencer. Now, I'd say the lighting here gives a lot more of a dreamlike feel, especially at night time where we are purely lit by candlelight or imitation candlelight. It gives the film this authenticity that you wouldn't really get any other way. The night shots were mostly long takes with dollies, and so it was also very accurate in lighting. Little lights everywhere, and we were surrounded by the lights. You couldn't move. In the beginning, when I said every frame feels like a painting, I truly meant it. And whilst there are shots, like in any film, where there would be no significant meaning behind it, there is still, at the very least, one frame in every scene that feels like it would be at home in the National Gallery. Now, this is a film that fully embraces the long take, and that actually influences the look quite a bit, as you almost have to be restrained in adding or taking something away. As well as that, you also have the colour, composition and movement all to think about, but I think it's best to start with the colour. I always struggle to describe the colour when talking about films like this, because it's just neutral. It feels very true, so apart from the fact that it helps us indulge into the story more than an abstract colour palette would, I don't think there's much else to mention. Now that isn't to say that the film lacked colour, as it's really bold in some parts, but it seemed more to focus on rendering the right skin tones and to make it almost look like a painting. The rendering of skin tones was primordial in my work. The study of portraits encouraged me to find our own tools, our palette. I sought both softness with no hard shadows, a slightly satiny and non-realistic result that remained natural and extremely living. When it comes to composing these frames though, I think the best way to describe it here is comfortable. The characters aren't confined unless the scene calls for it, and they're usually quite free to roam around. Now obviously I have to touch on the aspect of central framing, as unlike a lot of the films I talk about, it's actually used quite prominently here. I mean, of course it is, a lot of the film is painting. So as a general rule, having a character in the centre of a frame is done to create importance, and in every scene where it's used here, it is because of importance. But there are also other aspects. For example, on the cliff or a beach where it's used to create immersion, because this is a place that Eloise has never been allowed before. However, I'd also suggest that it's used to create impact, and it's doing exactly that at the very end. Filming the dialect of the gazes, the force of attraction between the two women, was one of the subjects of my work. I had to try to be a camera that looks, that peers, and to always find the correct centering of the faces within the frame. Celine wanted to make the proximity palpable. We had to look at these faces and not to frame them, to be with them. When it comes to moving a camera, especially in a film where we're observing characters, you have to be rather restrained. However, something that really comes to mind in this is the use of handheld to immerse us in the world of Eloise. And whilst this is a film where a lot of the time we are more observing them, it's still important to fall in and out of their worlds, and that's exactly what handheld does. I always tried to immerse myself in the scene, in Celine's thoughts. We always searched for the shot with the camera. We worked a great deal on the rhythm of the shots. It was an amazing collaboration. To finish off with the pre-production process, from what I can find, Mathon and Siema spent a lot of time in different galleries studying portraits from female painters from that era, and whilst I can't find the exact names, we can see that women like Anne Vallier-Coster, who was famous for her still lifes and portraits, and Elisabeth Villiers-Lebrun, again famous for her portraits, were big inspirations behind the way the light falls and the backgrounds. Now, there was also a lot of inspiration from paintings in a few other aspects of the film, such as this shot, which seems to be inspired by Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, and this one, inspired by Empire Horizonte. Then there's also inspiration from other films, Persona for example, but for a film about painting, the only inspiration that really matters to me is that in the way of paintings. So overall, Mathon has created a world that, as well as feeling true and authentic, also feels dreamlike, and she did so through having ultimate control of the light, creating an almost ethereal aura, utilising colour in order to make the film feel like a painting, and using a camera that will inspire cinematographers of period dramas for years to come. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and also if you did have a recommendation for an analysis, leave it down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!